Roughly 20,000 times a day, you take a breath. Every one of those cycles is governed by a background network called the autonomic nervous system. For more than a century, medical science treated the system as a closed loop. It dictates your heart rate, controls your digestion, and regulates your immune response, operating entirely beyond the reach of your conscious willpower. However, recent research suggests the system often drifts into a persistent state of low-grade stress. At the cellular level, the adrenal glands begin producing cortisol well beyond what the body was designed to handle. This excess hormone suppresses immune surveillance and weakens the barrier lining of the gut. This internal environment is often sustained by a simple mechanical habit, taking 12 to 20 shallow, rapid breaths a minute into the upper chest, rather than pulling air into the lower lobes of the lungs. This breathing pattern creates a systemic threat, keeping the sympathetic branch of the nervous system activated all day. Your blood vessels narrow, inflammatory markers accumulate, and the oxygen-deprived brain shifts into a foggy survival mode. Many of us normalize this state of systemic inflammation. We misattribute the resulting brain fog and exhaustion to aging or a lack of caffeine, and we simply push through. But there is evidence that we can reach inside that supposedly untouchable system and influence it directly, using nothing but the air already inside our lungs. Changing this internal state requires no pharmaceuticals or external devices. It relies entirely on a specific application of your own internal biology. In 2011, a man named Wim Hof arrived at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands to test the limits of that internal biology. Researchers injected Hof with an endotoxin, a fragment of E. coli bacteria. In every prior trial, this injection produced a violent, predictable cascade of symptoms: chills, headaches, and severe muscle pain. No human subject had ever resisted it. Hof sat on the hospital bed, began a specific pattern of breathing, and waited for the reaction to begin. This chart shows the predictable spike of a standard inflammatory response compared to Hof's blood work. While others were incapacitated for hours, Hof's fever barely registered, and his inflammatory markers plummeted to levels the researchers had never recorded. The data broke the existing scientific framework. The blood work proved that the supposedly autonomous nervous system had taken direct orders from a breathing exercise. Welcome to BioState. We are going to track the path of oxygen from your lips directly into your cells to see how this override is physically possible. The breathing pattern triggers an immediate chemical shift, a burst of adrenaline from the adrenal glands that matches the intensity measured in first-time skydivers. This response is mediated by the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the human body. It stretches from the brainstem downward, directly touching the heart, the lungs, and the immune tissues within the intestines. Consciously activating this neural highway is what allows for the level of immune and autonomic control demonstrated in the Netherlands experiment. The method for activating this pathway is built on 3 to 4 rounds of a highly specific breathing cycle. Start with 30 powerful breaths. Inhale fully, expanding the belly first, then the chest, letting the exhale fall out naturally. After the final exhale, empty the lungs and hold your breath. A timer tracks this retention phase, maintained as long as comfortable. Finally, take a single deep breath, holding it for 15 seconds before the next round. This precise sequence of mechanical pressure and oxygen deprivation provides the physiological trigger required to influence the autonomic nervous system. A complete session takes roughly 11 to 15 minutes. It requires zero equipment and no pharmaceutical intervention. While it appears simple, the result is one of the most dramatic voluntary biochemical shifts ever recorded in modern medicine. In Part 2, we will go inside the human cell to watch this session happen in real time. Because the very first internal event triggered by this breathing occurs within 30 seconds, and it is so extreme that most physicians would flag it as a critical medical concern. Under normal conditions, every breath you take is a precisely balanced exchange. Oxygen flows in, and carbon dioxide flows out, in a ratio your body maintains with extraordinary precision. This dial represents the pH of your blood. For your proteins to fold and your nerves to fire correctly, this number must stay at approximately 7.4. Your body defends this baseline with aggressive persistence. When you begin the first round of Wim Hof breathing, you pull in massive volumes of air while expelling carbon dioxide faster than your cells can produce it. Within 30 seconds, the concentration of carbon dioxide in your blood falls, and your pH begins a rapid climb. This shift is known as respiratory alkalosis. With every deep exhale, your blood becomes increasingly alkaline, often reaching a pH of 7.75 within just 3 minutes of sustained breathing. If a patient arrived in an emergency room with a blood pH that high, it would trigger immediate clinical alarms and require urgent medical intervention. Within this practice, however, you are choosing to force a temporary, controlled instability into your most tightly guarded biological systems. As your blood chemistry tips toward alkaline, the hemoglobin molecules responsible for transporting oxygen throughout your body begin to change how they function. Think of hemoglobin as a fleet of delivery trucks. Normally, they arrive at your cells and drop off their oxygen cargo. But because of a phenomenon called the Bohr effect, an alkaline environment causes these trucks to shut their doors. The hemoglobin grips its oxygen tighter and refuses to release it to the tissues that need it. This creates a biological paradox. Your blood is now more saturated with oxygen than it would be during normal breathing, yet your cells are effectively starving for fuel. That cellular starvation is exactly why you feel the hallmark sensations of the method. It triggers the tingling in your fingertips and the wave of lightheadedness rolling through your skull. These aren't random side effects. They are the result of vasoconstriction. The drop in carbon dioxide causes a narrowing of the blood vessels in your extremities, pulling blood away from your fingers and toes to protect your core organs. These bizarre physical events are the precise indicators of a deliberate oxygen mismatch occurring across your entire body. When you finish the round and stop breathing, your lungs sit nearly empty. Without fresh air coming in, carbon dioxide begins to rebuild in your bloodstream. As the carbon dioxide levels normalize, your pH falls back to its baseline. Those hemoglobin delivery trucks finally open their doors, sending a concentrated surge of oxygen into the tissues that were running on empty moments before. But the breath hold does more than re-oxygenate your cells. As your internal oxygen levels continue to drop, your brain detects what it perceives as a lethal threat. Your brain sends an urgent signal down to your adrenal glands, 2 walnut-sized organs perched atop your kidneys. Those glands respond by releasing a massive flood of epinephrine, commonly known as adrenaline, directly into your bloodstream. You are sitting safely on your living room floor, but you have successfully forced your brain to engage a systemic survival response, usually reserved for life or death emergencies. In 2014, researchers at Radboud University published a landmark study to see if ordinary people could replicate these results. They trained 12 healthy volunteers for just 10 days. To test their immune systems, researchers injected the volunteers with an endotoxin, a bacterial component that typically triggers an immediate inflammatory response. This chart shows the results. The trained group's epinephrine levels exceeded those from a first bungee jump. Interleukin-6 dropped by 50% compared to the control group. TNF-alpha was similarly suppressed, leaving volunteers with almost no physical symptoms. The Radboud data demonstrates that these physiological feats are a universal human capability, accessible to anyone with a few days of training, rather than a genetic gift unique to Wim Hof. While a single session can shift your blood chemistry and immune signaling, the effects compound significantly over time. In Part 3, we will examine what happens when you repeat this practice for 30 consecutive days, focusing on your sleep architecture, mitochondrial health, and a specific protein that drives neural growth. Through the simple act of breathing, you gain a rare opportunity to exert influence over the innate immune defenses that have operated on autopilot for millions of years. The first time you complete a full Wim Hof breathing session, the physical response is intense. Your adrenaline spikes, your inflammatory markers dip, your blood chemistry swings through a dramatic alkaline arc. If you never repeat the exercise, your body files the sequence away as an isolated stressor. It registers as a biological anomaly. Within hours, your physiology returns right back to baseline. The real physiological shift depends on a specific variable: repetition. What happens when you apply this exact same respiratory stress morning after morning without fail? During the first 3 days of consecutive practice, You will likely notice a sharp surge of alertness the moment you finish. That is the residual adrenaline still circulating through your system. But a few hours later, practitioners often report a heavy wave of afternoon fatigue. Your body is actively expending energy to process this novel daily stimulus. Other early physical signals include mild headaches or moments of sudden emotional release. During extended breath holds, some people experience spontaneous tears or an acute lightness in the chest. These initial symptoms are signals of adaptation, much like the muscle soreness you feel after starting a new strength training routine. This early fatigue is simply your nervous system beginning the work of recalibration. By the end of the first week, a structural change emerges. Researchers call it autonomic resilience. Repeated cycles of deliberate hyperventilation, followed by a deep resting state, train your nervous system to become flexible. Your body learns how to ramp up activation when required and downshift into recovery the moment the demand passes. During the breath hold phase of the practice, your oxygen levels dip while carbon dioxide climbs. This creates a state of controlled metabolic stress in your brain. The brief oxygen challenge acts as a biological warning system, instructing your neurons to actively fortify themselves against future stress exposure. They accomplish this by producing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. This protein acts like cellular fertilizer, physically strengthening synaptic pathways. This growth is heavily concentrated in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, areas critical for memory, learning, and executive decision-making. Electroencephalography studies on experienced practitioners measure this shift in real time. Following a session, brain scans show a spike in alpha and theta waves, states linked to calm attention and deep creativity. This physiological upgrade explains why daily practitioners report a feeling of quiet sharpness that lasts through the afternoon. Their brain is operating on a more efficient, responsive system. As you cross into week 2, the effects reach your circadian rhythm, resulting in a noticeable improvement in sleep quality. The newly acquired autonomic flexibility allows your nervous system to smoothly shift gears into the parasympathetic, rest and digest mode required to initiate sleep. Clinical measurements show specific increases in slow-wave sleep. This is the deepest stage of the sleep cycle, the crucial window where human growth hormone peaks and cellular tissue repair accelerates. Deeper sleep creates a compounding return on your biological investment, translating into improved physical recovery, stabilized mood regulation, and sharper cognitive performance. Between days 20 and 30, the repeated practice begins to reach your immune landscape. Blood tests from long-term practitioners show measurable reductions in C-reactive protein, a primary marker for systemic inflammation. The daily respiratory stress teaches the body to safely dial down its baseline inflammatory set point to a lower level without dangerously shutting the immune response off completely. At this stage, emerging research points to the activation of brown adipose tissue. Unlike typical white fat, brown fat operates as an internal cellular furnace that burns calories to generate heat. Positron emission tomography scans of Wim Hof revealed elevated brown fat activity compared to standard control groups. While cold exposure is typically required for this response, researchers hypothesized that the intense daily adrenaline surges triggered by the breathing technique alone might be enough to stimulate this internal thermogenesis. Inside almost every cell, your mitochondria adapt as well. Intermittent oxygen deprivation triggers a signaling pathway that trains these cellular power plants to extract and utilize oxygen with higher efficiency. Over a month of practice, this heightened mitochondrial efficiency yields a larger total output of ATP molecules, the universal energy currency your body relies on to function. But this specific breathing technique carries severe risks. People attempting it have lost consciousness, and several have been hospitalized. To understand why this practice can sometimes turn life-threatening, we have to look at the longest nerve in the human body and how it controls this entire biological mechanism. When you deliberately alter your blood chemistry and oxygen saturation in a matter of minutes, you initiate a rapid, measurable shift in your internal state. Under the right conditions, these changes are well tolerated. If misunderstood, they carry severe risks. The most immediate risk is syncope, the medical term for a sudden loss of consciousness. This occurs during the breath hold phase. when your brain receives a significantly reduced supply of oxygen. The danger is hidden in the mechanics of hyperventilation. Rapid breathing expels massive amounts of carbon dioxide. Rising carbon dioxide is the primary signal telling your brain to take a breath, so expelling it artificially delays that urge. This chart tracks the biological trap. It shows dropping oxygen levels relative to depleted carbon dioxide. Because the carbon dioxide signal is suppressed, your blood oxygen can fall past a critical danger threshold well before your body recognizes there is a problem. This chemical lag means a practitioner can quietly pass out from hypoxia without ever feeling the desperate, gasping panic of suffocation. This is why the environmental rules for this practice are absolute. Never perform this technique in water or while operating a vehicle or while standing near hard surfaces. A loss of consciousness for even a few seconds in these settings results in drowning or catastrophic collisions. Certain populations face elevated risks. For individuals with epilepsy, these rapid changes in blood chemistry and oxygen supply can lower the threshold for seizures. People with high blood pressure or cardiac arrhythmias must consult a physician first. Each round produces sudden adrenaline surges and blood pressure fluctuations that place acute stress on the heart. Pregnant individuals are advised to avoid the practice to prevent potential drops in fetal oxygen. For those with severe anxiety or panic disorders, the intense physical sensations of air hunger can trigger a panic attack rather than reduce stress. Because the physiological stress of the technique is genuine and potent, deriving benefits from it requires absolute control over your physical posture and your environment. The biological stress that carries the risk of a blackout is the same mechanism a man used to voluntarily suppress an immune reaction during a clinical trial, achieving a level of control that textbooks previously labeled as impossible. The mechanism is the vagus nerve, wandering from the brainstem deep into the abdomen. Science long assumed it only carried commands downward, but 80% of its fibers are afferent, reporting from the gut, heart, and lungs to the brain. Because the vagus nerve is a bidirectional highway, we can use voluntary mechanical actions, like the rhythm of our breathing, to send specific instructions up to the unconscious regions of the brain. The process begins with the inhale. Deep, forceful breathing stretches mechanoreceptors, pressure sensors embedded in your lungs. During the breath hold, relaxing the diaphragm with empty lungs creates a massive pressure shift in the thoracic cavity, amplifying the sensory signal traveling to the brainstem. Finally, the recovery breath. A deep inhale held for 15 seconds engages the Bohr reflex. This pressure-sensitive feedback loop in the cardiovascular system triggers a surge in the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting recovery. In response to this cascade of signals, the brainstem commands the adrenal medulla to release a spike of adrenaline. This adrenaline release suppresses pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically IL-6 and TNF-alpha, halting the inflammatory cascade before it can mount a full assault. The vagus nerve is the physical bridge that transforms conscious breathing into unconscious immune regulation. If you are beginning a practice, start conservatively. Aim for 2 to 3 rounds per session, performed first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, while seated or lying flat. Focus on full but relaxed inhales and passive exhales. In the early stages, do not force your breath holds to their absolute maximum. Instead, allow your body time to adapt to the stimulus. Consider logging your retention times to track your autonomic flexibility. This measures how effectively your nervous system learns to navigate and recover from controlled stress over time. By navigating this biological stress in a safe environment, your body builds a resilient baseline that often translates into calmer emotional responses throughout the rest of your day. Long-term practitioners consistently describe systemic benefits, including clearer focus, deeper sleep, and a higher tolerance for physical and psychological challenges. The science is still young, however. Many of the supporting studies are small, and the long-term effects of daily practice over decades remain an open scientific question. Because every medical history is unique, this information is for general education. You should consult a qualified clinician before making changes to your health routine. Understanding the anatomy beneath the breath turns a simple daily act into a tool for biological communication. Subscribe to BioState to continue exploring the extraordinary systems running inside you.